this video, we're going to dive into the conversation of customers who are using SalesForce to manage their business or organization and who have come to the conclusion that maybe SalesForce is not the best answer for them in terms of their software needs. Now, helping me today is Mr. David Barwick, one of RCC's senior engineers. Hello, David.
Hello, Richard.
So David's been working with some of our customers in migrating them off of SalesForce into FileMaker. And it's actually not that hard to do. So this video is going to be kind of a brain dump of where SalesForce is at in the market, and then also really what the procedures are for migrating your data out of SalesForce into a FileMaker solution. So David just got done doing a couple projects like this, so his brain is fresh and ready to go in terms of answering questions. And so we're going to pepper him with a bunch of that. But before we get into the part of the video where we actually do the migration or where we look how that is done, I want to just cover a little bit about SalesForce. SalesForce annually does about $5 billion in business. They're really a huge organization. What SalesForce effectively has is a pre-canned sales solution that operates in a browser. So SalesForce does about $5 billion in business per year. That makes them larger than FileMaker itself. But keep in mind, FileMaker is owned by Apple. So Apple backstops FileMaker. Now, there are really two huge factors at play when comparing and contrasting FileMaker as opposed to SalesForce. I guess maybe three issues. One is that SalesForce is really easy to deploy, and it can really quickly scale to hundreds of simultaneous users. Now, FileMaker itself doesn't deploy quite as fast because, for the most part, FileMaker Incorporated doesn't sell their product as a service. They sell you the software, and then it's your job to install it or hire someone to install it or otherwise go out and contract to get the hosting done for you so it's hosted up on a cloud. So sometimes people are attracted to SalesForce just because they can throw money at it and it instantly works. Now, the downside of SalesForce is that SalesForce fundamentally is nowhere near as flexible or as easily customizable as FileMaker. So if you want a higher degree of flexibility, or you want to really customize the software to fit your business needs, then FileMaker is certainly the way to go. Additionally, if you look at the cost per user per month, FileMaker is a fraction of the cost of what SalesForce charges. Now, let's talk about this as briefly about the pricing, so we've covered this. SalesForce offers various tiers of their software. And to be frank, if you get up to the $250 per user per month cost, SalesForce does some pretty amazing things. For example, you can put in some contact information, and SalesForce can go out and actually dig up data on this contact, potentially some background information on who they are and what their position is in the organization, etc., and actually help autofill some of that information for you into your contact database. Now, that's pretty cool, but not everyone needs that. In fact, at $250 a month, a lot of people would have to ask themselves if that capability was in their best interest. Now, FileMaker doesn't offer any data enhancement services at all. So if you want to put in a name of a user and maybe an email address, and then have a third party go and help populate all the other additional information, maybe dig up, what their purchasing power is and all this sort of thing, then SalesForce can be pretty powerful to help you in those areas. However, a lot of people are kind of put off by the cost of SalesForce. At its most expensive configuration, and I'm calculating this based upon a group of about 10 people using a FileMaker solution, is going to cost about $15.50 a month per user, and that includes the client software and the access to a shared hosted server that's up in the cloud. So FileMaker basically has one price, and it's $15.50 a month. And that's compared with SalesForce's entry starting price of $25 a month. And of course, if you want the added capabilities, like you actually want to have 10 people, then you have to jump up to the $65 version automatically. The $25 is almost in some ways a lost leader. It's for teams of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. But even at 5 users, it's still $10 a month more per individual person. So if you have 10 people, that's going to start to add up in terms of the price delta between the two products. So we get into this question of people get into Salesforce, they realize it's not as flexible, they realize the cost if they're paying $65 a month is a whole lot different than $15 a month. And they try to figure out how they can get into a tool that's cheaper, that's more flexible. And that's really where this video comes in. This video is about taking your data out of Salesforce and putting it into a pre-built CRM solution that's available out there right now to the public. It's called FM Starting Point. Now, you can import it into any system you want, but FM Starting Point, I think, is good for this conversation simply from the standpoint that it's totally free, one. Two, it's being supported by one of the largest FileMaker consultancies in the business. And three, it's been around already 5 years and it's not going anywhere. So it's got kind of a history and it's being supported and it's free. So really that's a pretty cool entry point to jump into. So David, I want to bring you into the conversation at this point, and I'd like to know what the customers' reasons were for moving away from Salesforce.
Well, the biggest reason was the flexibility that FileMaker offered them. Just like you said, they had been using it and maybe added a custom field here and there, but were really hamstrung by not having the flexibility they wanted. So by far the largest reason is flexibility. And FM Starting Point offers a complete integrated solution that actually in some areas goes beyond Salesforce right out of the box. So the combination of the flexibility of FileMaker and the FM Starting Point template helped them make the decision that they wanted to move.
Now, one thing that's important to understand is that FM Starting Point is not designed to be purely a sales management tool. It has the hooks in there for that, for the sales team, but it's not as deep in all the facets of qualifying leads and lead management and lead scoring and things like that, that out of the box Salesforce will do. But what we run into a lot of times is that people get into Salesforce and they only use a fraction of the capabilities of Salesforce. And frequently, like anything else in life, you want something that the product doesn't do. And I mean, I think you ran into that, right, David?
Exactly. Flexibility, the cost did come up when we were discussing customizing some screens and maybe a couple $1,000s, and the client said, well, we spend more than that just on licensing alone with Salesforce. So the only time the cost came up, it actually was a secondary consideration, I think, on the customer standpoint.
Yeah, and some customers are more keyed towards the pricing component. Some customers, and actually I think it would vary even with individuals in the organization. If you're the finance person, you're the person writing the check, some people are going to be really cost conscious, whereas the features are secondary. People who are actually doing the job and trying to operate the database on a daily basis will want the database more precisely tuned to their needs. So in this video, I don't really want to get into a conversation about how hard or easy it is to add fields in either tool or to customize. I think that I have literally hundreds of other videos that talk about the FileMaker platform. We have training courses that talk about it, and it's pretty easy to establish frankly, the flexible superiority of the FileMaker platform. So let's go ahead and carry on with the assumption that we've made the decision to move from Salesforce, and we want to bring it into FileMaker. And Starting Point's a great place just to park that data, at least to get started. I mean, the whole idea behind Starting Point, it's a starting point for your solution, and it does a lot. In fact, some people never customize it at all, but like you said, you needed to add some things for the customer. So the customer comes to you and says, hey, let's do this. So I guess you have to get the data out of Salesforce. So what's involved with that?
Real simple. Just do a full Salesforce backup from within Salesforce, and that will produce a set of files containing the data that we can then import into FM Starting Point.
Now, to be clear about that, the skill set that we're talking about, probably any intermediate developer should be able to do this, correct?
Correct.
However, I think we're making this video because we've generated some experience and now we kind of have a better grasp of what's happening. So you go into Salesforce, you do a complete backup. Are there other backups you can run? Why wouldn't we run the other back? I mean, what can you clarify that just a little bit?
Salesforce has a complete backup, and then they have a feature called Data Loader, which sounds backwards, but Data Loader allows you to do a custom backup. So if you just wanted to back up 6 files, you could do that. A full backup does a backup and produces all of the backup files.
So to jump our video forward here a little bit, we're going to bring over here a sample data dump from Salesforce. And this is a standard snapshot, at least at the $65 level, I believe, of SalesForce. And what this is every data dump in here is a separate table within the Salesforce system. And so it has a lot of pieces and a lot of moving components to it. Now, to give you as a comparison, FM Starting Point has about 30 tables in it. So it's much smaller in terms of overall scope than Salesforce is. And I think we acknowledge that up front. However, most people don't use all the extended features of Salesforce. In fact, in both of your customer cases, I mean, how many tables were they actually using? How many sections? I mean, did you import all 120 or how many did you import?
No, it's around a dozen tables.
So the customer was using about a dozen tables. So accounts, contacts, were they using invoicing? What were they doing? Notes, I guess.
Estimates, projects.
Okay.
To-do lists is a big one, which in Salesforce is tasks.
Okay. So one of the things to note was that there are some terminology differences. Now, account and accounts are the same. Is that correct? And contacts are the same. Is that correct over here?
That's correct.
So we have those over here. And then you said to do a list, and sometimes I call them action items. What do they call that? They call that tasks? Tasks?
Correct.
All right, so that's fine. So what other, was there any other interesting naming issues that went on?
No, products is products. Staff in Salesforce is users.
Okay. Well, then that brings up the question of making sure that we can import this information correctly. Now, I've got a number of training videos that talk about both simple and complex imports for the FileMaker platform. And that's part of our learningfilemaker.com video training course that we have. So I'm not going to get too deep into it, but why don't you go and bring up like accounts or contacts and let's talk about this. So this is a sample data backup, I guess, or a data dump, what I refer to, of the account data out of Salesforce. So what we see on the left is the ID. Now, is this the ID underscore account, as we would call it in FM Starting Point?
Yes.
So this is a unique key value here, correct? So none of these should be identical.
Exactly.
All right. And then for edification, this parent ID over here is, what is that? I mean, how is that compared to the ID over there on the left?
The parent ID would be if we wanted to group a number of accounts, say for a company that owns a number of separate companies under one parent.
Okay, and to be clear with everyone about that, that's not something that we normally see with most FileMaker solutions. It's not built into FM Starting Point. Now, you could custom build a parent account system into FM Starting Point, but I think a vast majority of people don't even think, they think of accounts as companies and they deal with those companies, but they don't really think about them. And we're not talking about separate locations. We're actually talking about separate companies. So that's interesting. So this helps us start to line things up. Of course, we see billing street, city, state, zip. And if we scroll right, of course, we have all the other data that comes to the system, like phone number. So we can see the phone and accounts and websites and everything else. So that's pretty slick. Now, if we have a field that doesn't exist in FileMaker, we can always define and add that right in the spot in our import dialog. Did you end up having to do that with some of these fields?
Yeah, in fact, the technique that I used is I copied and created all of these fields in Starting Point so that I import directly by field name and then move the data if needed within Starting Point.
So you would script it that way? I would think that you would be able to import directly into most of the fields, and then you'd have to probably add fields for the ones that were missing. So for example, we don't call it type in Starting Point, but we have this field here, and then we have, city, state, zip, country. All these fields already pre-exist in Starting Point. But I see what you did. I mean, basically you imported it into a complete set, and then you scripted it to move the fields where you wanted them to go. Is that what you did?
Exactly. I did a replace on the found set. And so I would just replace, if billing street we have named a little different, I would just replace it with the data from billing street.
Okay, so that's another way of doing it. So that's an actual technique that, we haven't really talked about in any of our videos, but that's where you import everything into like a parallel set of fields, and then you either manually script it or run a replace command or whatever you want to do to move the data one field at a time correctly. I'm not sure that's a technique I would have gone, but I don't micromanage our senior engineers to a high degree because that's why they're senior staff. And it may have been better this way. I'd have to get into it and do it myself. But the point is you import in, and the key field that we really have to keep track of is this one here. Now, if we bring in contacts, let's talk about contacts. Go ahead and bring that up if you would. So here we got our contact screen here. And it's really important to notate, and that's what I was looking for with you, David, was the account ID, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can cross-connect the contacts to the accounts and back and forth. Now, a lot of people, when they use FM Starting Point, only will use, say, for example, contacts because they really don't have so many people at the same company. It's something they have to really worry about. But in a situation like this where you're importing from Salesforce, you very well may have separate accounts that are populated. Now, notice right here under column A, that's going to be, once again, this is ID, in this case, underscore contact. Over on the left up there, it's ID underscore account. So once again, the first column is going to be the primary key for this particular table. And then there may be additional foreign keys, as we refer to them, that allow you to cross-connect other things throughout the solution. We have account ID right there, and that would be important to import into ID underscore account in FM Starting Point. So you start to see what happens is people start to get this data imported. And so after the import process, they go through this, you get some skills or you work with at least a mid-level developer or better to do this. We can actually go ahead and jump into FileMaker and see the actual end result. So this is the end results of your actual import process. We brought over 200 and some odd customer records. Now the notes down there were a separate import. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What table was that, just out of curiosity, because people are going to want to know. What's the name of the Salesforce table for the notes?
Is actually notes.
Oh, well, that was simple enough as it was. So yeah, sometimes we call it notes and communication. That's why on the tab in the FM Starting Point it says common notes. That stands for communication notes. Some people like to call it communications, but notes, and it's really both. It's when you want to talk about the customer and you want to log all the interaction back and forth, phone, email, fax, whatever you did with the customer. It's kind of a central repository for logging all that. So Salesforce calls that note, so that's another good tip. So I guess it's time to say congratulations on a successful import, right? And then
right. The import was successful, and then this is where it gets interesting and fun because you'll notice over on the right-hand side here are some fields that the client had added to their Salesforce database. These are some of their custom fields, and so we were able to display those the way they want here on this account screen.
Now let me ask a question. Is the way they displayed them here, is this similar to what they displayed in Salesforce, or Salesforce wouldn't allow for this level of flexibility?
No, Salesforce displayed them in the custom field section in a vertical list.
So they're not inter-threaded on the layout like the contact or account screen here?
Correct.
All right. And maybe it's possible to have Salesforce do that. I imagine if you paid a consultant enough money to do that, they could do that. But how easy, I mean, once again, this gets into how easy FileMaker is. You go to layout mode and you simply drag and drop the field on here and you're done, right? So, I mean, it's kind of crazy how simple this is. So if you had a field from Salesforce, then or from, Starting Point, and you decide that you wanted the field on here, you find the field, and then you just drag it. Like there's OSHA, right? There's some OSHA information, occupational safe and health.
Notice the underscore C, sorry to interrupt there, but the underscore C for internal use is important because those are their custom fields they added.
Does Salesforce put that on the end of it automatically to notate it's custom?
Yes.
That's an important tip for everyone who wants to learn this, is that underscore C indicates a custom field that's defined by that particular Salesforce user. Or account, I should say. Not user per se, but that account. There you go. And so you drag and drop it on there. You can color it. You can save it differently, whatever you want to do. You can move it anywhere you want. That's really the true benefit of FileMaker. Of course, it's kind of ugly here the way we just threw it on screen, but you can color it, move it, whatever you want to do. Well, I don't know what to say, David, but pretty cool. And actually, in the big scheme of things, not that complicated to move people off of Salesforce.
No, very easy. It's a CSV imports. The time to actually do the imports is just like you're seeing here, goes quite quickly.
Clearly, the customer is getting excited about making customizations. That's really cool. And that happens a lot with most FileMaker people. When they get into it, they see all the cool things they can do, generally how easy it is to do for the most part. And if you want a little bit of training, you can get someone to help train you. We have a training course that helps with that, pretty inexpensive. So clearly moving away from Salesforce. And like I said, Salesforce has its practical benefits, but a lot of people get into it thinking it's everything and everything they needed and everything they wanted, and they find out that they're paying a lot of money for kind of a closed-in system in a lot of ways. So I appreciate David giving us a tour of how to move from a Salesforce deployment into FileMaker, and specifically, in this case, to streamline things and make it easy, how to move the data into FM Starting Point, once again, which is a completely free solution. So thanks, David.
You're welcome, Richard.
So this is Richard Carlton and David Barwick for RCC, and we'll catch you next week.